Before we dive into today's explosive story, let me ask you this. How often do you get to see a senator absolutely dismantle one of the most vocal members of Congress in front of the entire nation? Trust me, you've never seen anything like this before. And if you want to keep catching stories the mainstream won't give you straight, make sure you hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and leave a comment below with your thoughts, because after this, you'll want to be part of the discussion. Now, let's get into it. The Senate hearing room was not just full, it was charged, the kind of thick electric tension you could feel pressing against your chest, making even the polished oak desks seem to hum with anticipation. Staffers scurried about with last-minute notes, their whispers carrying the urgency of people who knew that what was about to happen wasn't just another Washington sideshow, it was history in the making. The high ceilings arched above like a cathedral of governance. Every detail reminded those present that this was no ordinary chamber. The hushed murmurs, the faint clatter of papers, even the scrape of a chair on the marble floor, all seemed muted by the weight of what was coming. And then, with measured precision, Senator John Kennedy stepped forward. His stride wasn't rushed, it wasn't hesitant, it was deliberate, almost cinematic. Here was a man known not just for his razor-sharp wit, but for wielding truth like a blade. A senator from Louisiana with a draw that could charm a room, yet cut through the fog of political theater with unmistakable clarity. But this wasn't just another day of speeches. The air itself seemed to tighten when the name Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was mentioned. Representative AOC, the firebrand of the progressive wing, had lit a fuse days earlier with a bold claim that the Attorney General, during an appearance on Fox News, had issued a veiled threat against her, a claim that traveled across social media like wildfire, igniting her supporters and enraging her critics. The chamber waited, silent and still. On one side, AOC's words, heavy with passion, echoed by her base across Twitter, Instagram, and headlines nationwide. On the other, Senator Kennedy, preparing to not just respond, but to dismantle, piece by piece, what he saw as an unfounded attack on the very integrity of America's institutions. As he adjusted his glasses, his eyes sweeping the room, you could feel it. Something was about to break. And when Kennedy finally opened his mouth, the words that rolled out were not just remarks. They were the opening salvo in a clash of reason versus rhetoric, evidence versus emotion, truth versus spectacle. The stage was set. The storm was about to begin. The silence was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every eye in the Senate chamber was fixed on Senator John Kennedy as he placed his notes on the podium, the weight of the moment pressing down like a storm cloud about to break. He didn't rush. He didn't stumble. He stood steady, one hand resting on the stack of papers before him, the other adjusting his glasses with that familiar, deliberate motion. It was the calm before the fire. Kennedy's voice rolled out, low and steady, but carrying the bite of a man who knew exactly what he was about to unleash. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, pausing just long enough to hold the room in suspense. "We are gathered here today to examine the integrity of our law enforcement agencies, not to indulge in baseless accusations that erode public trust and deepen the divisions among us." The words landed like a gavel strike. A few heads nodded in agreement. Others stiffened, bracing for what was to come. Kennedy wasn't simply speaking. He was setting the stage, laying down the rules of engagement. Then came the pivot. His eyes, sharp behind his lenses, turned toward Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, seated in the chamber's gallery. Her earlier claim that the Attorney General's appearance on Fox News amounted to intimidation wasn't just a passing remark. It was, Kennedy declared, a grave accusation, one that cries out for evidence, not mere emotion or supposition. He leaned forward, both hands now gripping the podium, his southern drawl thickening as he drove the point home. "I've taken the time to watch that Fox News segment. Not once, not twice, but multiple times. I've studied the transcript line by line, and let me be clear, folks. What I see is an effort to transform a routine policy disagreement into a personal vendetta. That is not the American way. That is not how we conduct ourselves in this chamber." The ripple it caused was immediate. A low hum spread across the room, some senators exchanging quick glances, reporters scribbling furiously. The weight of Kennedy's words was undeniable. This was no off-the-cuff jab. This was a scalpel, cutting clean through the noise. And then, with a mixture of restraint and razor-edged precision, he delivered what felt like the first crack of thunder in a coming storm. "The representative is free to voice her opinions. I defend her right to do so. But when she alleges that the nation's top law enforcement officer is threatening her, she had better come armed with more than a social media post and a gut feeling." Gasps fluttered through the chamber. A senator across the aisle shifted uncomfortably in his chair. In the press box, cameras clicked like rapid gunfire, desperate to capture the expression on AOC's face. Kennedy didn't flinch. He straightened his notes, his gaze unwavering. He wasn't finished, not by a long shot. What had just unfolded was only the opening salvo, and the real storm, the scorching rant that would leave the chamber shaken, was still gathering strength. The room knew it. The nation watching on live television knew it. Senator John Kennedy had just fired the first shot. The air inside the Senate chamber felt heavier now, as though the very walls had absorbed the tension. Senator John Kennedy didn't just stand at the podium, he commanded it, his presence filling the space like a general before battle. His hand rested lightly on the thick binder stacked with transcripts and highlighted notes, a visual promise that what was coming next would not be mere rhetoric, but a dismantling built on fact. He cleared his throat, leaning closer to the microphone. "Let's break this down, folks," he began, his tone deceptively casual. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez insists that the Attorney General's remarks on Fox News were a threat. So let's put those remarks under the microscope." With deliberate precision, Kennedy flipped open his binder. The rustle of pages carried across the hushed room. He lifted the transcript, holding it aloft for senators and reporters alike to see. Her exact words, and I quote, "Expect our elected officials to uphold the law and to be mindful of how their words can influence public behavior." Kennedy paused, his eyes scanning the room. "Now I ask you, where's the threat in that statement? That's not a warning shot, ladies and gentlemen. That's a reminder of duty. That's not intimidation. That's accountability." A ripple of murmurs spread across the chamber. Some senators nodded in quiet agreement. Others shifted uneasily, realizing Kennedy had cornered the argument with the power of context. But he wasn't done, not even close. He leaned in further, his voice sharpening, his southern cadence slicing through the silence. "If we're going to label every call for civility as a threat, then every parent who tells their child to watch their language has just committed an act of intimidation. And if that's the road we're going down, then God help us, because we're not governing anymore. We're grandstanding." Laughter flickered from a few corners of the chamber. But Kennedy didn't smile. His eyes burned with conviction. He wasn't there for applause. He was there to draw a line in the sand. "What we're seeing here," he continued, pacing his words like a seasoned litigator, "is an attempt to turn a molehill into a mountain, to take a benign comment and twist it into a weapon of outrage. That's not leadership, that's recklessness, and it chips away, bit by bit, at the trust the American people have in their institutions." His voice rose now, not in anger but in force, as though summoning the weight of history itself. Representative Ocasio-Cortez has every right to be passionate, but passion without evidence? That's just noise. And America doesn't need more noise. We need clarity, truth, and leadership rooted in facts. The room was electric. Reporters' pens scratched frantically against notepads. Cameras whirred and clicked. AOC sat stiffly, her expression taut, as Kennedy's words hung in the air like the ringing of a struck bell. Kennedy closed his binder with a sharp snap. This chamber is not a stage for viral sound bites. It is a place where facts must rise above feelings. And until evidence is brought forward, let's stop wasting the people's time with theatrics. It was more than a rebuttal. It was a scorching rant, a calculated demolition that left no ambiguity. Kennedy had not only answered AOC's accusation, he had burned it down to embers. And yet, as the echoes of his words faded, everyone in that chamber knew the clash was far from over. This was just the fire's beginning. The moment Senator Kennedy snapped his binder shut, the chamber seemed to exhale. But outside those marble walls, the storm he had unleashed was only beginning. Within minutes, Kennedy's words were clipped, packaged, and fired across the digital battlefield. Screens lit up in newsrooms and living rooms alike, the headline practically writing itself: Kennedy destroys AOC in scorching Senate rant. Cable news anchors rushed to their desks, their producers barking orders into headsets. On one side, conservative outlets replayed Kennedy's sharpest lines on a loop, branding him a champion of reason who had stood firm against political theater. On the other, liberal networks scrambled to defend AOC, framing her as a lone voice calling out institutional overreach. But no matter the spin, one truth was undeniable. Kennedy had set the narrative, and the rest of the country was reacting to him. Social media erupted like wildfire. Twitter hashtags trended within the hour. Hashtag Kennedy vs. AOC. Hashtag facts over feelings. Hashtag scorching rant. Clips of Kennedy's quips, passion without evidence is just noise, and every parent would be guilty of intimidation if that's the standard, circulated with captions ranging from admiration to outrage. One tweet from a self-described independent voter summed up the mood. I don't always agree with Kennedy, but he just spoke the truth every American needed to hear. In diners across Louisiana, Kennedy's home state, locals huddled over coffee, some slapping the morning paper with pride. That's our senator, cutting through the nonsense like nobody else will. At the same time, college campuses in New York lit up with debates, with AOC's supporters rallying on Instagram Live to insist that her warnings about intimidation shouldn't be dismissed. The divide wasn't new, but Kennedy's precision had sharpened it into something impossible to ignore. Pollsters wasted no time. A midweek survey revealed a 12-point bump in Kennedy's approval rating among independents, while AOC's numbers among her progressive base held firm. The clash wasn't weakening either figure. It was amplifying them, pulling the American public deeper into the spectacle. But the real intrigue lay in the tone Kennedy had set. Commentators across the spectrum noted how he had reframed the debate, not as left versus right, but as evidence versus accusation. A centrist anchor declared on live television, Kennedy didn't just rebut AOC, he elevated the standard of discourse, a statement that sent shockwaves through the media landscape, sparking furious rebuttals from her defenders and quiet nods of respect from moderates. By the week's end, Kennedy's binder, thick with notes and transcripts, had become a symbol. Memes showed it photoshopped as a weapon of truth, while political cartoons depicted Kennedy wielding it like a shield against AOC's fiery rhetoric. The chamber had gone quiet after his rant, but the nation hadn't. Kennedy's words reverberated far beyond Capitol Hill, reshaping the conversation at kitchen tables, barbershops, and even international headlines. The Louisiana senator had thrown down the gauntlet, and whether people loved him or loathed him, one thing was certain: America was listening. And as the noise grew louder, one question loomed over the entire country. How would AOC respond? The dust had barely settled in Washington when Senator John Kennedy returned to Louisiana, stepping into a packed community center that felt more like a revival than a political gathering. Folding chairs creaked beneath the weight of farmers, teachers, veterans, and small business owners who had come not just to see their senator, but to hear his account of the showdown that had consumed the nation. The air buzzed with anticipation. For days, Kennedy's words had dominated the headlines, sparking debates from Capitol Hill to coffee shops across America. Now, face to face with the people who knew him best, he had the chance to transform a fiery confrontation into something bigger, a lesson, a legacy. He began softly, his drawl weaving through the hum of the crowd. Folks, what started as a disagreement over a few words on a TV screen turned into a national conversation about how we lead, how we speak, and how we hold ourselves accountable. He let the silence breathe for a moment, his eyes sweeping the room. I didn't go to Washington to chase headlines or to pick fights for sport. I went there to fight for truth, and truth doesn't need theatrics. It needs evidence. The audience leaned in. They had seen the clips, heard the commentators, but here Kennedy distilled the chaos into something simple, something human. Words carry weight, he said, raising a finger. When we throw accusations without proof, we're not just risking our own credibility. We're shaking the very foundation of trust that keeps this country standing. He told the story of his binder, the pages of transcripts, the highlighted notes, the careful preparation. That wasn't just for show. It was proof. Proof that when you stand on facts, you don't need to shout to be heard. Applause rippled through the crowd, not the wild roar of partisan triumph, but the steady clap of people hungry for clarity in a noisy age. And then he turned the mirror outward. This isn't just about me, or about Representative Ocasio-Cortez. This is about all of us. Every time you see a headline that makes your blood boil, every time a tweet pops up that demands your outrage, ask yourself, where's the evidence? Because if we don't hold our leaders accountable to the truth, then we're just feeding the circus. The room erupted in cheers. Kennedy's words weren't just a defense of his actions, they were a call to civic responsibility. He wasn't simply closing a chapter, he was opening a new one that challenged ordinary Americans to rise above noise and demand integrity. As the crowd gave him a standing ovation, Kennedy smiled faintly, the weight of the Washington storm behind him, but its lessons etched firmly into the future. This wasn't just a clash between two politicians. It was a moment that would echo as a reminder of what leadership should look like. And if you believe moments like this matter, if you think the truth deserves a voice louder than the noise, then do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe because we've got more stories coming that you will not want to miss.